Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursdays Live with Chug. Each week, we cover pressing topics that matter to you and your business. I'm Arianna Gonzalez from Chug, attorneys and CPAs, tuning in from our San Diego office. Please join me in welcoming partner and attorney Diya Mathews from our Edison, New Jersey office. Hi there, Diya, and welcome.
Thank you, Ariana. Good to be here as always.
Thank you so much for taking the time. For today's topic, we're going to be talking all about citizenship by birth, rights, risks, and what the road ahead looks like. So, just a quick disclaimer before we get started, this conversation is for informational purposes only. It does not create an attorney-client relationship. So, if you do have questions, please comment them below or email us anytime at info@chug.com. So, let's get into it, Dia. What exactly is birthright citizenship and why is it significant under US law?
Yes, so birthright citizenship is foundational to the US, right? It's the rule that anyone born in the US, born on US soil, is automatically considered to be a US citizen. And this was enshrined in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, to the US Constitution, which states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens, right? So this guarantee is very broad, and historically we have relied on it. People have relied on it for the fact that children born in the U.S. would automatically be granted citizenship.
Mm, that's a great foundation. So, building on that, how does the 14th Amendment define and guarantee birthright citizenship?
Right. So before the 14th Amendment was made to the Constitution, there were some doubts about whether everybody in the US, most notably the African Americans who had been freed after the Civil War, whether they would automatically have a claim to citizenship. And so the 14th Amendment was passed to make sure that these emancipated African Americans would be considered citizens of the United States. And so the 14th Amendment basically states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. And then this was challenged a little while later. So the 14th Amendment was adopted in 1868 after the Civil War. And then it was tested before the Supreme Court in the popular case, United States Wong Kim Ark versus United States. This was an 1898 decision, and basically, the Supreme Court held by majority that anyone born in the United States is a citizen at birth, regardless of the status, the immigration status of their parents. So it's understood now that the Constitution guarantees the citizenship of almost all the children born in the United States. The only exception would be, and it's a very narrow exception, for children of foreign diplomats. So they are not considered to technically be within the jurisdiction of the United States. So the children of diplomats have immunity. Even if they are born in the United States, they are not considered automatically United States citizens.
Understood. That's clear and thorough. So, what did the Trump administration's executive order say and why was it issued?
So yeah, President Trump, and this was a campaign promise from him, right, that he would try to end birthright citizenship. On the 20th of January, 2025, soon after he took office, President Trump signed Executive Order 14160. It's titled Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. And so this EO, this executive order, targets the scope of birthright citizenship. Its stated rationale is that the 14th Amendment had never been interpreted to extend citizenship universally. And the main purpose of this EO executive order is to stop what the current administration thinks is a trend with anchor babies, right? They think a lot of people come to the US unlawfully, illegally, and then they have anchor babies to help them stay on in the US. So President Trump and his allies have argued that the US is also different. Like most European countries don't have this, right? You don't, and with most European countries, you don't get citizenship by birth. So they want to try and move the United States in that direction. And so, they came out with this executive order to put an end to birthright citizenship. And so, what it does, right, from a legal standpoint, what it does is It's basically using that clause, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, in the 14th Amendment, to say that this will not include people who are here without lawful immigration status. So only children of US citizens or permanent residents would technically be understood to be subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and then entitled to citizenship here.
Wow, important context there. So, moving into reactions, how did states and others respond to the executive order? Do we have any information on that?
Yes, and so I think it was, pretty much what was expected. Almost immediately after the EO was issued, many of the states and immigrant rights groups like the ACLU, CASA, they all jumped and they filed lawsuits to block the order. Um, and you can see how, the line falls. So states like New Jersey, New York, Washington, New Hampshire, Maryland, they've all joined, they all had litigation. And these suits were filed in federal court. So immediately, within days, I would say this, the district courts in all these jurisdictions had issued preliminary injunctions. Now, some of these injunctions were state specific. So they blocked the enforcement of the executive order in those specific states. But some of these courts went further, right? They had what we call nationwide injunction. Basically, they said that their injunction would apply across the US and would apply to all unborn children. So by, I think, the end of February 2025, we had at least three separate nationwide injunctions in place. And so then the Trump administration appealed these rulings from the lower courts, and then the disputes were finally before the Supreme Court.
Understood. So, looking at recent developments, can you talk about what the Supreme Court decided on June 27th of 2025?
Yes. So that's the one that has caused all this consternation, right? The Supreme Court decision came towards the, I think it was the last day of their term. It was issued on June 27, 2025. And it was part of many rulings, several rulings from the Supreme Court. But the citizenship birthright case is Trump versus CASA, and that actually consolidated a few lawsuits. So the important thing to note is that the US Supreme Court did not rule on the merits of the case, right? They did not get into whether the birthright citizenship executive order issued by the Trump administration, whether that is constitutional or not. Instead, it addressed a very limited question, almost, I would say, a question of procedure. And what they looked at is whether the lower courts had the authority, had the power to issue these universal injunctions, which would block the executive order for everyone in the U.S. The Supreme Court basically said that the nationwide injunctions exceeded the lower court's traditional powers, and so it said that the courts, when issuing these injunctions, had to limit it to the specific plaintiffs in that case, instead of trying to kind of extend them to all the newborns in the U.S. So, in practical terms, what it means for us is that only those families who are actual parties to the lawsuits, could retain the protection of the injunctions. Or if it is a statewide injunction, then that also holds good. The other thing to note about this, the Supreme Court's order, is that they also stayed the application of the executive order for another 30 days. So 30 days from June 27th. And so that will bring us to July 27, 2025. So until then, the executive order does not take force anywhere. But after July 27th, the executive order would be enforceable in any state that has not already blocked it by injunction, right? So, again, going back to, the first point, the Supreme Court expressly stated that it was only deciding the scope of the injunction and not the merits of the constitutional challenge. So the nationwide blocks are disallowed, and the 30-day countdown begins. And I guess we will get back to the question of the constitutional validity of the EU at a later point.
Wow, that's a key ruling. So, What happens next? What can we expect in the upcoming days as the fallout of this decision?
Yeah, so certainly this is not good news. And, even if you're not having a baby, you're not expecting, it's still, it's a major shift. And so with the Supreme Court's June ruling, as I said, it's going to take effect in 30 days after July 27th in all the states which don't have injunctions. And that I believe would be about 28 states. Now, because 22 states have the injunction. So federal judges in states like New Jersey, New York, Washington, California, which blocked the injunction. So for them, there's no concern. For babies born in those states, they will continue to get the citizenship, U.S. citizenship under the traditional birthright rules. They'll still be protected by the 14th Amendment, etc. And in the other states, the 28 states which are not covered by the injunction, the EO will become enforceable after July 27. And so, it's a little unfortunate. This is going to create a patchwork system where, depending on where you are born, you may or may not have a claim to US citizenship. So there's going to be more litigation, I would think. Even immediately after the June 27th ruling came down, civil rights groups have already filed for new nationwide class action lawsuits, and this is because the Supreme Court decision kind of said that if you do it as a class action, then it makes sense to get a nationwide injunction, right? So the ACLU and several other nonprofits have asked the federal court to certify a class of all US born children who would be denied citizenship. And so they're trying to get them certified as a class and then seek a nationwide injunction based on that. And I believe a hearing on one of these cases is set for August 1st, 2025. So we'll know then, that they might succeed in getting a nationwide injunction if they get the class certified. In parallel, the pending appeals of the other injunctions will probably continue through the courts. And ultimately, I'm thinking, and I guess all legal experts um, anticipate that the constitutionality of the executive order will also go back to be decided by the Supreme Court.
Hmm. Turning to legal strategy, what are the legal solutions or next steps?
Yeah. So we have to have some solutions, right? Because I think if, the estimate is that if there is no birthright citizenship in these states, then we'll have about 4.7 million children who would not have citizenship by 2050 or so. And then these children who are born here but they have no claim to US citizenship would then have to, go through major obstacles. Like they would not get SSNs, they would not be able to get passports or birth certificates. And then that would in turn block them from accessing many services from the state, like healthcare and food and schooling and things like that. So we have to come up with some solutions. I would so for the immediate future, um, it'll be based on the injunctions and the class action suits. So the good thing is, as we mentioned before, the Supreme Court has only limited the scope of the relief, and the lawyers are and these ACLU type organizations are trying to secure the class-wide injunctions. And depending on the outcome, we might get some relief based on the class action. Um, and then again, going back to the merits of the EO itself, most constitutional experts seem to agree that the EO itself will be struck down. And in fact, every federal court that has looked at this, very cruel order, already they agree that it is unconstitutional, right? Some judges had very strong words to say about this. So it's most likely that courts will find that the 14th Amendment's, text and precedent protect birthright citizenship, and you cannot just change it by executive action. So I'm waiting to see how this returns to the Supreme Court in a challenge on the merits. And until then, we might need to keep pursuing litigation, or maybe take work around the litigation, like in terms of going to a state which has an injunction before you give birth.
Hmm. Could this executive order affect the citizenship status of people already born in the US?
Um, so you're asking whether this will have a retroactive effect. The answer to that, I would think, will be no, because the executive order itself states quite clearly that it will only apply to children born after February 19, 2025, this year. So it explicitly states that it will not affect the entitlement of other individuals. And I don't think the administration wants that, because that would just, it'd be like trying to put the genie back in the bar in the lamp. And it's just going to be too many cases that could come undone, and there'd be a lot of like really constitutional issues there. So I don't think the administration will try to have it apply retroactively. It would be for children being born now.
Good to know. So, what immediate steps can families take to protect themselves if they fear changes to birthright citizenship?
So yeah, so for people who already had children born in the US, the main thing would be in terms of documenting everything. And if they haven't applied for things like, mostly you would apply for the birth certificate within, you have to have a birth certificate within 30 days of the child being born. But make sure that you have all these official documents secured. So obtain the US birth certificate, apply for the US passport if you haven't yet, or at least get the process going, and then preserve the medical and all these other records. Keep the baby's hospital records, yeah, and if it is a uh, consular, like CRBA, which is a consular report of birth abroad. Remember that children also derive citizenship through citizen parents, even if they're not born in the US but overseas. So if it's a situation like that, make sure you get all the documentation done quickly. You don't want to wait too long after the birth to apply for any of these things. Also gather all the parental documentation necessary. So, for the parents' immigration and citizenship status, whether it is, the proof of non-immigrant status or visas, green cards, naturalization certificates, these might become relevant in the future. So, you want to make sure that all of that is secured and with you. And if you have any doubts in your mind, then always consult with a qualified immigration attorney. Don't just, I would look for somebody who practices immigration law, and get a consultation with them if there's any questions in the mind.
Absolutely wonderful advice there. What should expectant parents concerned about these changes do right now to safeguard their child's citizenship?
Yes. So for anybody who's expecting to have a child after July 27th, right? Because till July 27th, we are good. But after that, there are a few considerations. So the first would be consider the place of birth. And again, this is not foolproof, because I think the first idea that people have is, if they are in a state that is not governed by an injunction, then can they try go to a state like New Jersey, which is covered by an injunction, and try to have the baby there, so that they can take advantage of the injunction. So they could try that, but the question is also, is it enough to just temporarily be there at the time of birth? For example, if you go back to a state, if you go back from New Jersey to a state which doesn't have the injunction, could you then, could you be denied citizenship based on the fact that you don't reside there? So that's an issue which we don't know how it will play out, but I suppose you could, consider the place of birth. And and then also keep in mind that you can still, the state cannot refuse a birth certificate, right? A birth certificate by itself, it just states that the child was born in that particular place, so you will always be entitled to get a birth certificate. But what's going to be up in the air is what kind of weight the federal government is going to give to that birth certificate. Are you going to be able to apply for a passport based on that? So that's what we'll have to wait and see. And after the child is born, so get the the state certified birth certificate, obviously, and apply for the U.S. passport if you're in a jurisdiction that allows that. And then again, going back to what we discussed earlier, keep all the records, like all pregnancy birth records, and also for the parents, keep all their records in place as proof of their status, and speak to an attorney, an immigration attorney, if you have specific concerns.
I want to talk about alternative paths really quick. If birthright citizenship were restricted, what alternative pathways to citizenship might be available to us?
Yes, so for children who are not going to be eligible for citizenship at birth, right? If this is all assuming that the EU is not invalidated by the Supreme Court ultimately, but let's say this birthright citizenship is really cancelled. So then the outcome is going to be that some children will necessarily be made stateless in the United States. So far, the United States never really had issues of, there were not very many issues of children being stateless because of birthright citizenship. Now, if that goes away, then we would probably see a lot more issues of statelessness. And it's not as rare as we think it is, because it does happen in other European countries, issues of statelessness. So we'd have to be prepared to deal with that. For affected children in the US, they would then have to try obtain citizenship or permanent residence through other channels. So family immigration, like a child could be sponsored by a parent who ultimately becomes, a permanent resident, and then they could derive, or then maybe the parent can petition for the child's residency. And once the child becomes a permanent resident, then of course they can apply, they can be in the naturalization queue. And for older children who are lawful permanent residents, they could again look at other options like marrying a US citizen, etc. So we'd have to see, they'll have to explore all these other options, or maybe through employment and things like that.
That's really helpful. One more question for you. What critical documents or records should individuals secure to prove eligibility for citizenship amid changing rules?
Yeah. So again, going back to documentation, the birth certificate, the US birth certificate. So right now, the US birth certificate is synonymous with citizenship. And if that changes, then obviously, the US passport is going to be the next best thing. Because under the law, the US, getting a US passport is evidence of citizenship. So apply for the US passport or the CRBA, the Consular Report of Birth Abroad. That's for children who are born overseas, and but to US citizen parents. So we'd keep those handy. And then the hospital medical records, while those are not really definitive proof of citizenship, hospital records can sometimes be used to corroborate where and when somebody was born. And then the secondary evidence would be the documentation for the parents, proof of parents' status at the time of birth of the child, their non-immigrant visas, if it's green card, naturalization certificate, all of those, and also the naturalization certificate, if it is for a parent, would keep those also handy.
Wow, wonderful insights today. Thank you so much, Dia, for taking the time to cover this with us and talk about this important topic. That is all we have time for today, so this brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. A special thank you to you, Dia. To stay up to date, please subscribe and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send us an email anytime at info@chug.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know what topic you want to see next. And make sure to join us back here next week for more pressing topics that truly matter to you and your business. Until next time, stay safe and take care, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Dia. See you next time.
Thank you, Ariana. I don't know if you want